Hello, good afternoon, and my apologies, everyone. I hope you can hear us okay. Something is amiss with my headphone jack, and that is not working. Can you please let me know in the comments if you can hear me and if there's an echo? Anyone? Do you hear an echo, Larry? No?
Nope.
Okay, great. So I am here today with my guest, Larry Sand. And for those of you who are not familiar with Larry, he is a former classroom teacher who is also president of the nonprofit California Teachers Empowerment Network, a nonpartisan, non-political group dedicated to providing teachers and the general public with reliable and balanced information about professional affiliations and positions on educational issues. Welcome, Larry, to The Reason We Learn. And my apologies for these technical difficulties. It has never
No problem.
happened before, you poor thing.
No problem at all, Deb. Pleasure to be
Okay,
here.
thank you. So today's a big day in California, as I understand. Did you or your organization have anything to do with it, or is this completely on the part of the parents and their
No,
organization?
this is a parent-led thing. Just to clarify, my organization doesn't take positions on issues. In
Oh,
my own personal life, I am very opinionated,
okay.
which is, I think, is why I'm here. But as leader of my organization, we sort of counter the teachers union in the sense that the union is always speaking for teachers. We don't speak for teachers. We want teachers to speak for themselves.
Right. And so I pulled this from the organization website and it said you provide reliable, balanced information. So to
Right.
clarify, everybody, this is not a partisan organization. This is not an organization that's saying do this or do that. That said, though, personally, I believe you've been fairly outspoken about the government monopoly on education. Is that correct?
Yeah, as you mentioned in your intro, I was a teacher. In fact, I taught for 28 and a half years, 24 of those in California.
Okay.
So I had a pretty good view of education. Of course, I went to public schools for my entire life,
Hmm.
my entire educational life, that is. And as a teacher, I have seen it from the inside, and it just has come to the point that I believe that government schools just don't work. I mean, sure, they work for some kids, but overall, they do not work and haven't worked for a long time and have gotten more and more expensive. And I think maybe it's just time to get rid of them. Separation of school and state.
Got it. Now, I want to ask you to explain a little further your definition of not working so the audience
Mhm.
understands why you think they don't work for the majority of students. And then if you wouldn't mind explaining, that'll be this part two, like what do you think would work? What would be a better solution?
Okay, well, I mean, I say schools aren't working because every test, every standardized test, especially the NAEP, which is a very good test, I've found. I was a testing coordinator in my school. I work with the NAEP people. They're very professional. They do things the right way. The tests showing that constantly students' literacy rates are in the toilet, frankly, and the math proficiency is not good at all, and it seems to be getting worse. And we keep pouring more money into the system. So I think it's time, as I said, to get rid of them. In 1840, we had a literacy rate of about 90% throughout most of the country, and now
Mhm.
that literacy rate's about 50 or 60%. I mean, there are various tests that we can look at. So we're getting worse. We're going downhill as the government has gotten into, maybe not at the beginning, maybe schools were better then. I got a pretty good education back in the 1950s when I went to school.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason, I'm sure the unions have had some or a lot to do with it, with all their work rules. For example, it's almost impossible to fire a bad teacher.
Right. Right.
So we need to, as I say, get the government out and replace them with private schools or homeschooling if a parent can do it. Homeschooling is best of all because a parent, just the way the parent feeds a kid and reads a kid bedtime stories, let the parent teach the kid during the day. Now, I realize that not all parents can do it. If maybe as a single mother has to work, etc., maybe then she can join a micro school or a pandemic pod, or if that costs money though, she, you know, might not be able to do that. Then she would have to send a kid to a private school.
Mhm.
And if a parent can't afford to send a kid to a private school, we should help, as a society, help them defray the expenses. Just like we don't let poor people die in the streets of hunger, We
Mhm.
give them what used to be called food stamps, now the SNAP cards. We can give them some money to get a private school education
Right.
and
So
schools and save the taxpayers tons in the process.
right. So be, I guess, analogous to saying we don't have a national supermarket. You get the SNAP card and you choose where you're going to buy your groceries. And the only limitation placed on that is, you can't buy lobster and champagne or something like that. But,
Right.
you know,
But yeah, but that's a good point. There are very few rules. You can spend it on pretty much what they want. And as you point out, they don't go to the government supermarket. They go to their local little Ralph's, Albertsons, whatever, local supermarket is near you. And, a capitalist money bound run market that has a choice, and you can buy any, different kinds of tissues or steak or whatever you want to buy. And you're not
right.
limited to, and you don't have to go to the supermarket that's right down the street from where you live, the way you do in California throughout much of the country. We have a zip code mandated education system.
Mhm.
And it's ridiculous. As I say, I mean, if you tell me you're going to have dinner tonight, and I said, "Oh, you're going to go to the little restaurant down the street from where you live?" You say,
Mhm.
"No, no, I'm going to get my car, go across town. There's a better restaurant, better food, better service." And I say, "No, you have to go to that crummy little restaurant down the street from where you live." You tell me I was nuts, and I would be making a nutty statement. But this is how we do education in California and throughout much of the country.
Well, and then in North Carolina and other states, what we have is, no, you can't go to the perfectly acceptable school down the street. We're going to stick you on a bus for 45 minutes and put your, drive you out to the other side of town to the crummy school
The
because
bus.
we need more people who look like you in that school or whatever. Or maybe it's a better school, but we're only moving you far away from your house at 6 o'clock in the morning because, to a place you don't live where you're not going to likely be friends with people because you can't go over to their house and play or hang out, or your parents aren't going to know each other, but at least you're sitting next to someone who looks different. That's
Yeah.
another thing that government has decided is important. So,
Right. And people of all races hated that. Their kids were spending half the day on a school bus going to a school out of their neighborhood, with kids they were not friendly with. I mean, what a disaster that was, run by our wonderful government schools.
right.
Yes.
And I think, a lot of people say, but they were well intentioned. And then we have to remind them about the road to hell.
Go to hell. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. So, what would you say to people who say, well, if people leave, I'm hearing a little bit of echo, but if people leave, as you're describing, whether they take their kids to the private schools, parochial schools, or homeschool, that they are abandoning, let's say, the kids who are foster kids or homeless kids or kids whose parents don't pay any attention or like that. So, in other words, you're describing a situation where we give the parents the SNAP card and so forth. And then the comment I always get is, well, you shouldn't be allowed to do that because then you're abandoning these other people. As if that's my
Well,
responsibility.
when you get a SNAP card, you give a parent a SNAP card. The parent goes to the supermarket, whatever supermarket they
Right,
choose. I think just about all supermarkets take SNAP cards,
right.
and they buy the best food that they can, hopefully, for their child. In the same way, they would go to the education supermarket and pick out the best education. That argument just does not hold any water with me.
Well, it also sounds to me like they're saying because of the few or the presumed few, because they don't even show data to back these
Hmm.
positions up. That's another thing I want to ask you about is evidence in general. I understand it that you look at, you've just talked about, you look at data, you look at evidence. Like, how are the reading scores? How are the math scores? How are things working? And it is demonstrably not working. I've noticed a trend lately where bringing that up in and of itself is considered, um, wrong. Like, how dare you mention the data? Um, so I think people are not talking about it as much. Where can parents go? I mean, can they go to your organization, or where would you recommend people go to get real reliable information on how schools are doing
Uh,
in objective measurements?
well, I mean, go to it's the National Center for Education Services, NCES,
Okay, that's one I've referenced. Okay, good, good. Okay.
and get NAEP scores. And the NAEP is given to various grades on various subjects in various years, and it takes a little bit of navigation. But if you're at all internet savvy, you
Mhm.
can find out across the country how schools are doing, and you can look by various school districts, by the country as a whole, whatever you choose. I mean, is the first thing that comes to mind. And then there are various state tests that are given, and I don't know all the different state tests, but
Mhm.
uh, a parent, just basically can do a little bit of Googling and find a world of information. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't just go to one side, go to different sides, compare just the same. We Google just about everything else in our lives. Google education, you'll come up with some good answers.
Right. Now, when you were a teacher, how were you trained? What was your teacher training process?
Uh, do you really want to hear this? Yeah,
I'm just
I
curious
went.
if it is different from how they're doing it today or what you've observed
Well,
about
I
teaching.
don't know exactly what they're doing today. I can't imagine it's any better. The courses were ridiculous. I took 11 classes for credit. I was excused for a lot because I had a lot of, I had taught for a long time with what are called emergency credentials because they're short on teachers. So I got rid of a lot of, I didn't have to take a lot of classes other teachers had to take, potential teachers had to take. But the courses I took were so easy. I snoozed through them. I got 10 A's and 1 B, and I'm not a genius or anything. I just basically, I fill out the form, do this as a test, easy test, blah, blah, blah. And I can honestly say I didn't learn anything. I don't think I learned maybe one or two things that helped me actually be a better teacher. Just about all that I got, all I learned about teaching, I learned in the classroom. And not that you asked, but I think we could get rid of the education schools and have an apprentice situation for teachers. Let a teacher go sit in a classroom with a good, experienced teacher for about 6 months, and that person will learn more about teaching in those 6 months than they will in years in ed school.
Right. Well, that's something that I've noticed too. I went an alternate path where I went to four-year college, majored in American studies, so it was like history, literature, other things, and then changed my mind and decided to become a teacher later
Mhm.
and went back to grad school just for the certificate and to get the master's, thinking, well, I'll just go ahead and get the master's and certificate at the same time. That'll be great, right? Well, according to the union, I priced myself out of the market because their pay scale has to pay a master's degree person higher, even with zero experience. Like I didn't have zero, I had a year, but they didn't want to hire me as a full teacher because they're like, well, you cost too much. I'm like, but I
Mhm.
know theoretically know more, right? And I had to do more student teaching than the other teachers had done, et cetera. So they used me in the classroom as the teacher, but they only hired me as an aide that first year even though I had more education. And then they would brag to the parents, "Oh, we have master's degree professionals in all our classrooms." There were 7 of us that did that too, to get around
Right.
the union
I
pay
mean,
scale.
you could have been the worst teacher in the world. I'm sure you weren't, but if you could have been, and with that master's degree, you would be held in higher esteem, get paid more money.
Right.
I mean, the way I don't, maybe people don't know this, but the way they pay teachers in most states is ridiculous. It's called step and column method, where you just by basically not dying over the summer, you come back to school the next year in the fall, and you make more money. And the other
Correct.
way you make more money is by taking as we're talking about these horrible, useless classes.
Yep.
So yeah, and you game the system. I used to take these classes when after I got my teaching credential because I knew I'd get more money. And I go there, once a week to Cal State LA for 3 or 4 hours, go to sleep, wake up, get the credits, get more money. And it did not help me become a better teacher. What helped me become a better teacher was being with the kids in the classroom, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work. And as I say, the apprentice system would be best for teachers
Right.
uh,
Do you
as a way
think
to
the way
learn.
they do it also, chases away good people? Not just good teachers, but good, decent people, humans who say, "This isn't working and I wanna improve it and I think it should be better," but they are dissuaded from complaining about it or even trying to think outside the box and do things differently by the system itself.
Yeah, I mean, teachers. This is probably going to make me a few enemies, but I think teachers tend to be very passive, at least in states like California, which where you had to join a union for many years, or actually had to pay money to a union for many years now, because the Janus case, we don't have to. But teachers tend to be passive, and I think the reason is because teaching is a very safe job. Not that it's an easy job, but basically you cannot get fired. In California, every year, 10 teachers out of 300,000 get fired. 8 of them are criminals. 2 teachers a year lose their job. I'm talking about teachers with permanence lose their job because they're incompetent out of 300,000. This is a crazy system.
Right.
And in California, you get to be permanent or tenure, whatever you want to call it, after 2 years. So, and you can't be fired. So, who is going to be attracted by a job like that? Somebody wants a safe job. What other
Right.
job do you have? It's basically a job for life if you want it. Other than Supreme Court justice, I don't know one job that's like that. If you're good at a job, you'll stay on, you'll get paid more. If you're not good at a job, you get fired. Not as a teacher, certainly not in California and quite a few other states also.
So how does it feel or sound to you to hear, teachers union presidents and people talking about parents like they're ignorant, they're not teachers, they don't know what's best for their children. As somebody who's been a teacher and also critical of the system, how does that sound? I mean, do you feel just like you want to yell at them and say, "Stop it! You're wrong. You're lying."
I've yelled at a computer screen quite a few times in my life. It doesn't do any good. And no, I just cringe when I read things like what Terry McAuliffe said recently about parents. And yeah, the state has come to think of these kids as their kids. It's not your kids, it's the parents' kids. And I mean, the I hate to say this, but the good thing about COVID is that parents saw close up what teachers were doing because many of them were forced to learn because the kids were learning to force online, and
Right.
because critical race theory has awakened has awakened parents to what's going on in schools. And now you finally have parents going crazy. I've been waiting for this moment for years because so many parents just assumed, as my mother did when she sent me off to school in the 50s, that I'd be getting a good education. And I did get a good education, I think. But now you can't be sure anymore.
Right.
Nope.
So that was that, things were even different when I first entered public school in the 70s. I'd been in Montessori, went into public in 4th grade. That was already a world of difference and quite jarring, and I didn't like it. But if I compare that to today, as bad as it was better. It was kind of
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
wow, how much worse it is. Um, and I'm seeing that now with my own kids because I pulled them out of public school. They were homeschooled, then they went into public school, now they're back in homeschool. And
Right.
with my youngest in particular, had to start in kindergarten in public school. Everything is worse for her than for my older 2 children. Same family, same parents. Because that's another thing we hear, isn't it? Well, where were the parents? When there's a kid who isn't reading or there's a kid who doesn't know math. What's
Mhm.
wrong with these parents? These parents aren't involved. Parents don't care about education. Then we care, and what do they call us? Right.
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 That's a good point. Yeah, and yeah, if you want to get if you, and there it's true there are some parents who don't really care. Well,
Mhm.
most do, of course, but those who don't care, all of a sudden, if they're given a choice, if you're telling them that their government-run school is going to be closed and now they have to educate their kids, these parents will start to care because
Yeah.
they have to care now.
Right.
So that would be a wake up call for the few parents. Granted, we're not talking about a majority, far from it, but those parents who don't care would wake up. Give them a choice. Yep.
Yep. And because I have to. And it's like anything else. So when you don't have to work, you don't work. I mean, there will always be people who want to work for other reasons than money, right? But there will
Sure.
all likewise, the other side of that is there will always be people who, given the first opportunity to not work, will not work. And the same
As
is
we're
true for
excuse me, as we're finding out now, the federal government is giving away quote free money, and all of a sudden, restaurants can't hire waiters. Why? Because people making as much money for not working. So why should they work?
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you'll always have that population of people. And then you end up with a new population who say, well, if they're doing okay without work, then why should I bother? So now you have like this second tier of people who feel resentful that they're doing the right thing. Like when I was a kid in school and they began, in college and they began lowering the standards. And
Hmm.
then I saw with my kids too, they're like, why should I work so hard? Why should I read the chapter when I can get an A and I don't have to read it?
Right.
The other kids are getting A's and they're not even doing the homework, or they're making us do group projects and I have to do all the work. Why should I care? It actually inculcates like the wrong values,
Right.
even
Yeah. It's
in
human nature.
otherwise good people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're going to give me money for nothing. Why should I work for it?
Exactly. Now, you recently wrote a piece about how in California, the kids literally belong to the state. And I'm not sure that most parents either in the state or out of the state understand that. Could you explain that a little bit? Like,
Yeah, this was, in the no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up file. There were two things I wrote about. First of all, California is the first state, and I maybe still the only, I'm not sure if any states followed us, that has a vaccine mandate for kids in school. And the punchline is that it's not only for public school, it's private school too. So any child attending a private school over the age of 12, pending approval from the FDA, will have to be vaccinated. And when the under 12 kids, get okayed by the FDA, they're going to have to be vaccinated too. Parent has nothing to say about it. The only way out, as far as I know, is if you homeschool, they can't make you get the vax. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they do that next in California, which is becoming a totalitarian state. The other thing, which is equally as scandalous, a new law was passed, I think it was in September. I don't remember the date, but where it's students now, this goes actually beyond school, is where children now can go to a doctor and get all sorts of gender affirming therapy, hormones, and worse, and use their parents' health insurance to pay for it. And the health insurance company cannot tell the parent what it was for. So you're going to get a bill for, you paid such and such for something, and it's going to be blank as to what it is. And this is, I just don't have words for the horror about this. Now, once again, this is not a school issue, but this is what kids can do after school, or probably even take a day off from school and do it. But this is not a school-related issue. This is clearly a California issue.
Well, I'm sorry to report, it is rapidly becoming a school-related issue in many states. I received some whistleblower documents from New Jersey, and I imagine it's probably going to happen in California if it hasn't, where under the guise of social emotional learning, they're doing these surveys, and they've baked them into all the academic core classes. So they no longer are separate from the core curriculum, and therefore harder to opt out for parents, because they'll put it into a writing assignment, or they'll put it into, some other kind of class. And these fish around, they actually call them screenings. They fish around to identify children they deem at risk of what we are not really sure. And they've partnered with behavioral health organizations, for-profit behavioral health services. Some are nonprofit, some are profit. And they will do telehealth medicine right there in the school. So the student will be pulled out if they've been screened for this telehealth session. They'll go to this therapy. The therapist on the other side, who works for one of these organizations, a parent doesn't know anything's happening, may then prescribe medication or other treatments. Some pretty scary ones. Some of them are experimental for depression, anxiety, gender and body dysphoria, all kinds of things. And as you said, it will be paid for. In those cases, it may be paid for by the taxpayer if they can't afford it or don't have insurance. Or, as you said, it will go back to the parents' health insurance, which of course is listed on the forms you fill out to get your kid in school.
Right.
So this actually is happening inside the school, and they may even go so far as to dole out the medication in the school building from the nurse's office, so the parent doesn't even know the kid's taking the medication, and the kid never leaves the school.
That I was not aware of, but thinking about it, I don't know why I should be surprised.
Yeah.
I don't think that's happened yet in California, but it sure sounds like it very well could and probably will happen here.
Right.
I mean,
Because,
why not? It's just the next step. I
right.
mean, we're
And of
so
course,
far down that road now.
they're saying it's because there's so much, remember the mental illness that we screamed about when they locked us all down and we said, you're going to cause problems with these children? And they said, no, this is for their safety. This is fine. The kids will be fine, they said.
Yeah.
And then they denied learning loss. Now they're saying, they're using as their excuse, there's so much depression and trauma from the past year. Only they're claiming the trauma is not from being isolated and locked away from life. The trauma is because of all the people who died. That the poor, oops, something happened. Oh dear. Now I'm alone again, having technical difficulties today. My apologies. But when he comes back, hopefully we can address that. But those of you watching, that's what they're saying now. So they just kind of move things around. They move those coconuts. And what they're saying in what I've read in the letters home to mom and dad or the letters to other educators is we have to deal with all the trauma that these poor children have, quote, seen 700,000 people die. They're actually using the worldwide number and they're acting like kindergartners know how many people have died around the world. And they're also acting like that number is, accurate, as if we know all the counts are accurate and so forth. And of course, we don't know any of that. And children should be shielded from that if they don't already know. Probably a lot of parents aren't talking to them about death, we hope. But to the extent that they have scared their poor kids, the schools are now using that as reasoning for the social emotional learning connection to medical processes. Yeah, the way he cut out was freaky. I hope he's okay. It says devices not connected. So he's got to connect everything again to come back in. Hopefully he will. And but I wasn't even aware that wasn't happening in California. It might be, and he might be catching up. As he said, as much as we pay attention to these things, you guys, like I'm living this almost 24 hours a day. I don't sleep all that much. If you go to my Twitter feed, you'll see that I'm up at crazy hours trying to keep up with the news. I probably shouldn't for my own well-being, but that's how fast it's moving. It used to be, if you recall, people who are fairly radical in their views about anything, about reform or changes to any institution, would push the envelope, and if they got pushback, they'd step back and they'd wait, or they'd try to sell it better, or they would just be very, very quiet until they got another opportunity. What we're seeing is unique in my lifetime as far as cultural reform, and that is first of all, the people on the ground, the grassroots people who are trying to change the culture and change education, are working hand in glove with the government people trying to change education. So there's really no separation of that activism, that kind of activism and state, to the point where you wonder which came first, the chicken or the egg. And then the next thing is, we know they're the minority. Like this, we know. Polls show it. They're the minority. Their views are minority views. Most parents don't want this. But when parents push back, rather than stepping back, they're doubling down. It's almost like they're in a hurry to do as much as they possibly can before we have a chance to legally stop them, which is really quite scary. Let me see. Okay, so let's see. I think he's trying to get back in. So, Larry, if you can hear me, what you can do is kind of refresh Chrome and log into the link again, and it should pull you back in, and then I can bring you back into the broadcast. I hope that works. Try that, see if that works. So as I was saying, they're pushing back really hard. Here we go. All right. So you heard everything I said.
Yeah, I heard. I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything. Nothing was wrong with this.
Everyone's suspecting some kind of like deep state thing. But I was just mentioning to people that they are moving at such a clip that people like us can't keep up. We're
right, but I mean, once again, this is just yet another of the myriad reasons to pull your kid out of school. I mean, your kid goes to school, a little boy one day comes home, a little girl, and the school knows about it. They don't tell you anything. Right. I mean, this is a criminal enterprise, and I don't use that term lightly. This is disgusting.
Right.
And,
I agree.
And while we're trying, in California, trying to get a law passed to outlaw this is just about impossible. So the only thing you can do is take your kid out of a public school.
Right. Now, what do you think about those who say, well, then they're going to come after the homeschoolers and they're going to try
in 2008 in California, they actually went after the homeschoolers and passed there was a ruling that said that homeschool parents had to have a teaching credential from the state. Now, it didn't outlaw homeschooling, but it put a big stepping stone there. And fortunately, a short time thereafter, the higher court reversed it, so parents, continue. But yeah, they'll try to do something. I don't.
It seems. It seems
Homeschooling is gotten, the parents are pretty hip though, and they'll fight it every inch of the way.
it seems rather hypocritical too, because we now have, for example, Black families homeschooling at the highest rate of any demographic relative, relative to a
Yes.
percentage of the population. And the arguments are always, we can't have voter ID, for example, because that would be just discriminatory and punitive and it's expensive and all these things. But a teaching credential, I know firsthand here in North Carolina, I tried to go back and renew my teaching credential, which had lapsed over a period of a decade when I got divorced. So in 2012, I said, all right, let me try to get a credential in North Carolina. I had it in Pennsylvania because I graduated from University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. Then I also had one in Illinois. I had one in Massachusetts. And I said, okay, let me submit all my paperwork and see what I can do. Maybe I have to take a class. I thought, like, whatever, renew something. It took them 6 months to respond, and they said, well, your degree was not from a North Carolina school, and therefore we cannot instantly certify that you had what we call a highly qualified teacher education. So you need to go back to school and
Mhm.
take what amounted to $10,000 worth of classes. I just asked, could I do it online? Could I do this? Could I get a provisional certificate in the meantime? Because I don't have $10,000 lying around. They said no. Now, of course, 5 or 6 years later, they changed their mind because of the terrible teacher shortage, and now they're letting any warm body with a pulse come in and get a certificate. But there I was, experienced teacher, homeschooling mom of 3, so I've taught my own kids to read, etc. No, I'm sorry, you went to an Ivy League institution, but no, that doesn't count. You have to have this other degree, 10 grand, please. And so imagine California saying, now you have to go get a teaching certificate. That's not chump change. Even if the person can't pay for it, now the taxpayers are supposed to pay for it.
Yeah, no,
It just, like you said, it all comes back to the government, kind of wanting to control all the pieces of it. And
Mhm.
because even if you got that teaching certificate, you're either paying for nothing, like you and I did, or they're going to indoctrinate you to a bunch of
Yeah.
garbage that doesn't mean anything.
No.
So that's the frustrating part. Now, I know that you also mentioned, I don't know if it's a colleague or somebody else, that you linked to an article in one of your articles about a phased approach to ending the public schools. Is that something you think is a good idea, or do you have another idea about how we would, like, the mechanics of it? How, other
Yeah.
than pulling our kids out, what do we do?
Well, obviously, we can't just close all the schools tomorrow because you'd have millions and millions of kids not having no place to go. Parents would be confused. So I suggest, I mean, it's just one idea. I'm sure there are many different ones, but my idea would be to first year just phase out kindergarten, and then the next year phase out grade 1. So it'd take 13 years to fully make the change. So the last public school would close, the last government school, I should say, would close in 13 years.
Mhm.
And by doing it gradually, you could get the private schools up to scale, because obviously private, people like kindergarten teachers all of a sudden are out of a job. Kindergartens have nowhere to go. So, okay, then people are going to start, private schools just for kindergarten, then, up to first grade, second grade, etc. So just by doing it gradually, you would help parents, and you would just enable the system to accommodate the onrush, because you're going to have, I mean, there are about 60 million kids in public schools, or between 50 and 60. All of a sudden, you can't just lock them off in, one day and say, okay, we're done. Go find
Right.
go find your own schooling now. It just wouldn't work.
Right. Do you think the system, I've heard some of my guests have said the system's too big to fail, in the sense that with the federal Department of Education, there are just so many layers to this onion that you'd have to get rid of, and they're all going to fight. So, for example, the unions, and then you have people who now have come to depend, for example, on IDEA funding. The parents who believe that that's getting their kids the special ed education they need, not realizing that half the kids are in special ed because of the failure to teach properly, and they're not even getting the money anyway. But that's a whole other show. But there, politically, what kind of will would it take to say we're just not having a Department of Education anymore? Because it seems like that would
Uh,
be something you'd have
uh,
to do first. Now,
yeah, you're fighting Goliath here. I mean, as you say, the bureaucracy is so big and so entrenched and so powerful that, I mean, frankly, it's something of getting rid of the government schools is something of a dream. I mean, the best thing we can do now is just sort of work on that. But in the meantime, opt for school choice, promote homeschooling, micro schools, etc.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you've got people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to push papers and do whatever else bureaucrats do to get wealthy. And they're not going to just walk off gently into that good night. They are going to fight like heck to keep their jobs. And yeah,
Right.
it's a monster.
Right. So that's kind of why I've been advocating on this channel for just stay local. Like, in other words, focus on your own house. Take care of
Mm-hmm.
your own kids, do what you have to do. Don't, put it on, like headphones, and don't listen when people say you're abandoning this or you're doing this
Yeah.
bad thing. Seek out like-minded folks, and just get your kids the education they deserve, and hopefully the results will show. Word of mouth will travel, and people say I want that too, and then maybe it'll collapse under its own weight eventually, right?
Yeah,
um
no, I think that yeah, that's the best way to do it. We're not going to have like a national movement tomorrow to get rid of government-run schools. So yeah, you
no.
start local, and you start in your own home, exactly, and then
Right.
talk to parents, and hey, I'm doing this. Why don't you try this? You can do it. That sort of thing.
Right, right, exactly. Do you think that it would be a good idea for people to entrepreneurs and teachers like yourself, or others, to start building that alternate pathway? That's one of the things I've been trying to work on myself. Is how, it's one thing to sit all day and say here's what's wrong, and it's
Hmm.
actually very easy. And then I feel like it's time even for me to start talking more about how to help those people, what kind of systems to put in place privately, and maybe even our own private accrediting group, or private private education place for parents. Like, let's say you're a parent and you say, I want to learn how to teach my kids to read. I have
Hmm.
a very young child and I'm not really sure what to do, and I want to do it right. Is there a class I can take? Is there something I can take as a parent to become that kind of teacher, or at least to select the right things for my child so that they are supported in that way? Seems like there's a big opportunity for that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, there certainly is, and there are many homeschool sites for parents. I mean, I guess probably the most famous is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and they provide legal help and God knows what else, which are, help parents.
Mhm.
And as the system scales up, there will be other groups coming along, and you'll have like a literal supermarket of places to go to turn. I mean, if you have legal questions, or you need some kind of syllabus, or your child is having problems, with learning, what you can do. Yeah, as things go along, as I say, this will scale up, and it all starts with each parent homeschooling their own, and then just talking to other parents, and,
Right.
and being supportive, and and if you've done it, so you can, other people say, hey, Deb, I'm having a problem here. Did you ever encounter this? What do you think
Right.
I should do? And then and then they become an expert, and then they tell other people, and that's how it goes.
Right. That's why I have a locals community for that purpose, and I have a couple Zoom calls a week where I try to help parents, and even teachers come on and talk to parents. Like, I'm trying to hang up a shingle and do something. What would be helpful to you? That kind of thing. What we've found is missing. Well, there are a couple of things missing. We need a better way to help parents find people to interact with in person and rebuild community,
Hmm.
because the school has so swallowed up community, if you will, like, where people gather, where the
Hmm.
kids are and all that, that parents feel a little unmoored. Like, well, where will my kid go to find other kids during the
Yeah.
day, and not just, after school? And then the other thing is job opportunities for parents who do still need to make a living, but they want to be there for their kid, and or childcare slash you know supervision opportunities, so the parent can go to work and the homeschooling still gets done with a warm body who's like knows a little bit, but they're not
Right.
literally the teacher, that kind of thing. So I think those are right now the questions I get from the greatest number of people. Like, I want to do this, and I
Right.
completely agree with you, and I believe in it. I just need those things. And my guest who's going to come on after you is Keisha King, and she's a Florida mom, and she's been putting together things like that.
Mhm.
So we are all sort of networking and working together. And I wanted to speak to you because it's rare to find a classroom teacher with, a lot of classroom teaching experience, least of all in California, okay,
Mhm.
who's willing to speak out and say, this isn't working.
Mhm.
It's not working. Because where you are, I would assume that's a fair amount of risk.
Really. But it's funny you talk about credentialed teachers. There, from what I've been reading, a lot of teachers like these micro schools because they're getting paid a good salary, and all teachers love small classes. Now, I don't think small classes necessarily help all kids. I was the kind of kid I like big class. I like getting lost in a class. I didn't want to be called on. I was kind of shy, not like now, and anyway, but as a teacher, you love small classes. And frankly, there's less work to do, less papers to grade, and fewer problem kids to deal with. And so teachers who go into a micro school with maybe 10 kids love it because they're getting paid about the same amount of money and they have
Right.
10 kids to teach, and it's very relaxed, and you don't have a billion rules you have to go by. So I don't think you can have a problem finding teachers in the micro school sense because they're going to, if you can afford to pay them. Obviously teachers can't work for free because
Right.
they need to pay the bills.
But that might be, one of those choices that parents make. Like some people go and shop at the big box store or at Costco or whatever, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
obviously, it's not a boutique grocery store. It's not a gourmet food
Mm.
store. But people are like, well, this is my budget and this is still good food, and I'm just going to go over here and do it with coupons, whatever. And then, of course, you have the little gourmets. So this, what I would imagine is you'll start having these kinds of choices, and parents will have to choose, these kinds of trade-offs. And
Right.
maybe we even get like we have now, same with grocery shopping, because I'm going to go to the butcher shop because I want like the best prime cuts of meat, but I'll go to the Costco for my breakfast cereal or whatever. So I'll
Right.
go to the Y for PE, but I'm going to go to the tutor for math or something.
Right.
So that you could, cobble something custom together using whatever mixture of values you happen to have. And that's something else I've been trying to explain to parents, that homeschooling is not school in your house. It's not like I put up a
Mhm.
blackboard or a whiteboard even, and, put little desks in a row and said, "Okay, let's do this." School doesn't even look like that anymore. So
Right. No,
it's
no,
it's
you're right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's all about choices, and people just are so accustomed to not having choices. Like, oh my God, I have choices now. Uh-oh.
right.
Yeah,
It is
no, it's
it is a
in the free.
responsibility. Mhm.
Yeah, no,
It
it's a
is.
big responsibility, but we are still, hopefully, at least in some ways, a free society.
Mhm.
And when you have freedom, choices automatically come with it. As I said before, when you go to the supermarket, you don't have to go to the supermarket down the street. You're not limited to one kind of yogurt to buy. We need to get out of this one size fits all, go to the school down the street education system. It's just
Right.
not working.
I think it could be a great opportunity actually to rebuild some of the things that got us to this place. I don't think we would have gotten here if our communities hadn't been decimated or split apart by some of the policies that were put in place in the last 50, 60 years.
Mhm.
And this could actually be an opportunity to get back all the things that, people like about living in America. Like
Mhm.
just being able to go next door and knock on the door and borrow a cup of sugar or whatever. I mean, we need to get back to knowing our neighbors, knowing who's around us, being more involved in our kids' lives, things like that. I think it could actually be a catalyst to a renaissance of sorts if
I,
we
I,
look at it.
I
Yeah.
think that's a terrific point. I mean, these government schools were basically engineered to channel kids in a certain way. And and one of the reasons was because of the incoming Catholic population.
Hmm.
I mean, they wanted public schools to really be, and were Protestant schools because Catholics were, had different ideas. So, and they were sending their kids to religious schools. So they came up, so the Protestants came up with something of a secular religious school, if that's
Hmm.
not an oxymoron. And I mean, that was certainly one of the founding principles of public education or government run education.
Without explicitly so. I've mentioned it on my channel many times. I've read quotes to people because they don't believe me. So I go back to the original documents and I'm like reading quotes, and people are like, and yes, it was incredibly xenophobic and incredibly racist and
Yeah.
not a positive thing.
No.
They didn't say, "Oh, we so badly want people to achieve their dreams." They said the
Mhm.
opposite.
Yep.
So
You're right.
it's funny to me when people talk about systemic racism, and then I look at the public schools and I'm like, you know,
Really.
because it's the one place. All right,
Oh yeah.
so this so I know that we had our little issues, and so we we kind of ate into our time. But before we finish, I did want to ask you, what are you doing now yourself? So you're doing the organization, and what kinds of projects are you working on, are in this area?
Well, I mean, as the head of California Teachers Empowerment Network, send out a monthly newsletter. We have a website, c10home.org. We help teachers mostly about union issues, get, emails from teachers. Well, gee, want to try to get out of my union, but I didn't, the unions have what are called windows periods. You have to leave the union within a 10-day period. It's crazy. Maybe in September, or different, each union has different rules. And if not, you're lost for the next year. So, I try to get them legal help. And in my personal life, I do a lot of media. I write for City Journal. I have a weekly blog for the California Policy Center. I've written op-eds. I mean, writing is pretty much my thing. I was up in Oakland the other day speaking to a group of Republican women about critical race theory.
Hmm.
So I'm busy, and I do a lot of Zoom stuff, I mean, which is easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's, it's funny you mentioned critical race theory, because when I first started this channel, I had so many things I wanted to talk about as far as education, but that lit a fire under me and I started talking a lot about it. And then as I got into the material, I realized that critical race theory, or critical praxis, really, critical theory in general, was sort of like this top of the iceberg, you know, and that there was all this other stuff underneath that actually was the conduit for the critical
Uh,
race theory. Like, it wouldn't really be possible without all these other things. And so now I've been trying to encourage people to, know about it, and it's poison, but also remember that even if you ban it, there was a big push to like ban it from the schools, it's not going to fix anything, because first of all, it isn't a thing. It's a
mhm,
worldview and a mindset, and there's so many pieces of this. What you've got the gender piece, you've got the social emotional learning, the psychological. We're going to parent your children
right,
and teach them values and teach them how to interact with others and solve problems. And 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be in accordance with your values.
right,
That's the Trojan horse. You start there by breaking down boundaries at kindergarten, telling the kid, like, you need to share and you need to be open and you need to share all your personal feelings all the time, every minute of every day. And if you don't, your boundaries are selfish. Then you get through to those kids and they believe that, it's it's a hop, skip, and a jump to tell them they're responsible for the outcomes of other people.
right. Yeah,
It's
no,
easy.
no, you're right. It is a tip of the iceberg, and not only that. And I know we don't have time to get into this, but this goes back to all this stuff. That really goes back to the progressive era in the early part of the 20th century, over 100 years ago. This has been building
Yep.
and building and building, and it's, as you say, and it's very wide with all the crazy sex stuff going on now, and um, yeah, it's just one part of the problem, and you can deal with it. I do urge parents to run for school board, go to school board meetings, raise hell, because if you're going to leave your kid in the system, you can't just do nothing. And it's not, you don't, and there are state laws and school districts that are talking about getting rid of critical race theory, but the good laws don't mention critical race theory. You just say we make it, we're outlawing where a kid cannot, where teachers can't teach that one gender or sex is superior to another sex. Just very general terms that no sensible person can deny. And
Right.
and those are the best laws. And in the, while we hopefully totally getting rid of government run schools, um, this is an important work to do,
Yeah.
and it needs to be done. It needs to be done immediately, and parents are catching on
Yeah.
finally.
I
Thank God.
that's exactly what I've been telling people is, I mean, school board, running for school board, I think, is really effective if what you want to do is change school policy around health. So anything to do with health, all this SEL stuff, whatever, that they do make bathroom policy, for example. They make suspension policy. They make all the policies around keeping your kids, safe from, physical and emotional harm. Like those policies they do control. What they don't do in most states though, especially California, is pick and choose the curriculum. That's mandated from up here. Like
Mhm.
they're saying you will teach ethnic studies, you will teach comprehensive sex ed, whatever. And then it's just a matter of, do you have a friendly superintendent who's going to say, yeah, we have to teach that, but let's use the most benign materials to do it, right? And of course, that rarely
Right.
happens. They take the list from the top and they go, what's the list? Okay, teachers do it because, as you said, they're lazy, they're passive. If there's a recommended list from the Board of Ed, that's what we're going to use. And
Right.
so going to the local school board and talking about, for example, a book that they're using in a class, is they don't have a say in it really. But the teacher does. The teacher does,
Mhm.
right? More often than not. I mean, even now, it's my understanding that teachers can close the door and, you know, teach better. Like they don't
Right,
have to
right.
teach this racial essentialism, but
Okay, well,
in order.
let me just two things. Let me just jump in here with a couple of things. One is, yeah, we just passed an ethnic studies mandate law here in California. Every high school student starting in 2029 and 2030 will have to take a one semester course in ethnic studies, but each school district will come up with their own version. We have over 1,300 school districts in California. So there are going to be school board battles for years over what can be taught. The state does have a model curriculum, which a school district can vote to use, but they don't have to.
Oh,
So
so it's different then. So they
yeah,
will be able to choose it. Okay.
so yes, and the other thing I want to talk about, and I'm writing about this. Let's see, today is Monday. It should be posted tomorrow on the California Policy Center news site website. Um, would you talked about when teachers can close the door?
No?
They can do anything they want. The state and the school district can have a mandate that you shall do A, B, and C. That door is closed. The teacher can do whatever he or she wants. And there have been some scandalous things done recently, which,
Right.
James
There's a
O'Keefe.
downside to that, obviously.
Right. And the only way out, well, the way out of it is to have all lessons recorded. Now, a lot of parents don't want cameras in the class because they feel it's creepy to have their kid on camera for the general public. But I maintain microphones. What reason would a teacher have not to have a microphone recording in real time everything they do? The public servants, they have maybe 30 precious children in their class. Damn it, I'm a parent. I want to know what that teacher is teaching my kid. Yeah, I can talk to the kid when he comes home from school, but he may have been brainwashed by that point. And now that we have a law in California that teachers can't do this, that we can't do this to teachers without a teacher's permission. And I think that's baloney, because a teacher is a public servant. They're paid with taxpayer dollars. Why
Mhm.
can't we record them? I cannot think of a reason. If you could think of one, or if one of your
Mhm.
listeners can, or
Nope.
viewers, I would love to know. There is no reason why a teacher should not be recorded.
I was opposed to the cameras from the standpoint that I didn't want the state owning footage of children, because if
Right.
they
Yeah.
owned
Okay.
the footage, they
Fair
could,
enough.
tinker with it. But
Fair enough.
I love the idea of the microphone, and the other one is fighting harder for right to record because they are public servants. I mean, for no other reason that you will have a population of students in the class who will need to play it back just to get the message of the lesson, because kids can be very disruptive and
Yeah.
they get, you're teaching all abilities in one room because they no longer track kids.
Right.
So, okay, y'all don't want to track kids and you say that it's racist to track the kids. Well, guess what? You've got a kid in there that has, mild ADD. Like they're not medicated per se, but small
Mhm.
distractions mean they didn't catch half the lesson. So why shouldn't they be allowed to
Right. Yeah.
record it without a big 504 plan and everything else? Shouldn't they just be able to take their own recording device and record the lesson for academic purposes? But
Yeah.
as
Well,
you
yeah. I mean,
pointed out,
that would be an option, but I just think that the school district should do it.
I
Yeah.
agree. I like the microphone idea a lot. And
Yeah.
I can't think, just like you, I can't think of a logical reason that they shouldn't have to do it. But my point was to the other side of that, that when parents, going to the school board about the choice, for example, of ethnic studies, they didn't realize that they were going to choose their own. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
But you see, in North Carolina, we don't really have that. If the state board or the if the state board says you will be teaching SEL, then they're teaching it and they buy the company's product and they put it in the classroom.
Mhm.
The only hope you have is by cultivating a relationship with the individual teachers. And of course, it won't always be possible. But let's say you have to put your kid in the school. My recommendation to parents is ask for a meeting and go face to face with that teacher as politely
Sure.
and civilly as you can. Let them know your concerns. Ask them to talk about their educational philosophy. Ask some important questions. I wouldn't go in guns blazing and say, "Do you teach CRT?" I would just say,
Yeah, right.
"Can I have your assurance?" And even bring a piece of paper if you want with something to get their signature to say, "Look, I'm a
Sure.
concerned parent. I do want to be your partner in this, but these are the things I don't want happening to my child in this class. Can you assure me they will not happen?" And
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
anyway, that's been what I've said. And
No,
if you're gonna
that's
know,
very important, and I would certainly advise parents to do that. But at the end of the day, that said, when the door is closed after
true.
your meeting, oh, sure, but, Ms. Philman, I will certainly do this, and I really love your kid, and take, the door is closed. You're up to the teacher's mercy.
That is true. The upshot, I guess, would be if you had a situation, as I've had with my own kids, when they were in middle school, where the kid comes home and reports the teacher said something or did something, in the class that contradicts what they signed.
Sure.
At least you've got a paper trail, and it's horrible that you'd have to go to that trouble. But I
Sure.
like the recording idea much, much better. Um, it would be hard to do, but I definitely think it's absolutely worth the fight. It's
Yeah,
absolutely worth the fight.
I don't know that it would be that hard to do. I mean, I'm not a tech person, but I'm, just.
Oh, I just meant legally, getting them
Oh,
to, because the
legally. Yeah,
teachers
well,
union will fight
well,
it
yeah, I
tooth
mean,
and nail.
well, state by state, as I said, here in California, there is something literally on the books that says a teacher has to okay it, which would
Right,
obviously destroy the whole purpose of a teacher say, no, I don't want to do it. No,
right,
this should be mandated. You know,
right. You could even do it county by county. So
yeah,
for
sure. Anyway, I mean, cops have cameras, and even then, the cop unions like that because the cops are protected. Somebody can say, "Oh, that cop beat me up," and there's a video, and you see the cop didn't beat the guy up. So,
right.
you know,
Same for teachers. Teachers are now
sure.
getting accused. We have this poor teacher in Rhode Island, Ramona, Bassinger, I think. She, was opposing critical race theory,
Right.
and she came into class one day and her entire whiteboard was written with her horrible, disgusting words and epithets and everything. And then she went out to recess and was surrounded by a group of children menacing her and threatening her with bodily harm and,
Mhm.
cursing at her and everything. Other teachers stood around, did nothing. Administration did nothing until today when she went to work and they made her sit in the teacher's lounge. She's sitting in the teacher's lounge. They won't let her go in her classroom, but they won't let her leave. And so she's just sitting there like some kind of pariah. And all she did was speak up on behalf of her students and the Civil Rights Act and treating them equally under the law and so forth.
Mhm.
And they're allowing this to occur. So if she were able to be recorded, nobody could say she's a racist. Nobody could say she's ever done anything but be an excellent teacher in her classroom.
Yep.
And that would
Yeah, no,
protect good teachers.
yeah, she's a good candidate for having a mic'd classroom, definitely.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, I can't thank you enough for spending this time with us. And again, I do apologize for
No
the
problem.
technical difficulties. Not sure what happened there, but I'm getting a new machine, so it might have something to do with my computer.
Stuff happens.
And I thank you for all the work you're doing. Folks, if you are interested in getting balanced, nonpartisan information about education topics, I would refer you to the California Teachers Empowerment Network and also look for Larry Sand's writings. You can Google and you will see articles that he's writing or has written, and you can, get it straight from somebody who's been a classroom teacher, what his take on this is. But it's just one more voice saying, teach your own. It covers all the bases. Safety, health autonomy, all of it. That's probably going to be your best bet, at least in the near term. And we can still work on reform or work on rebuilding or work on whatever, but these kids they don't have time. Their education is right now. They don't have
It's
time to wait
sure is.
13 years or 20 years.
Oh,
right?
thank
So
you, Deborah. It was a pleasure
thank
being
you
with you.
so much.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure meeting you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.